Hello, today is Monday, September 29th, and welcome to episode 507 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Deputy Executive Director Martha Miller, and I'm joined today by Advisory Board Member Lester Munson, Senior Fellow Morgan Vina, and Fellow Jessica Jones. So our focus today is Iran. The UN's snapback sanctions are officially back in force. This comes after a failed bid by China and Russia to delay the move. And as of Saturday evening, the old pre-JCPOA sanctions are restored. This diplomatic shift is happening on the tail of direct military action that occurred earlier this summer. U.S. airstrikes targeted Iran's core nuclear facilities. And the Trump administration declared that these strikes were a major victory, some suggesting that the program had been killed or set back for years. At the same time, Europe's E3, Germany, France, and the UK still felt the need to trigger snapback, citing the Iranian program, an Iranian program that the IAEA has documented the program to be at unprecedented levels. So President Pezeshkian publicly downplayed the impact of the sanctions on the Iranian people. But at the same time, Tehran decided it was impactful enough or problematic enough for them that they recalled ambassadors and denounced the move as illegal. The EU and Washington, are layering their own measures. And, we want to know, and I think our panel will share with us their thoughts on whether this new pressure will truly bite or just kind of reshuffle the cards and have the same old, same old. So Lester, I'd like to move to you first. Where do you square this? Like, on the one hand, we claimed, major victory that we had killed the Iranian nuclear program. And then on the other hand, here we are just a few months later with the IAEA saying that it's at unprecedented levels. What is the real story here?
Well, the real story, for some reason, we didn't talk about after Trump hit the nuclear mountain there in Iran. The real impact of that is it shows the Iranians that the U.S. is willing to hit their nuclear weapons program and will do so again if necessary. That's the real story. How much was damaged, I don't think is really that big of a question. At the end of the day, Iran could buy a nuclear weapons program from North Korea or Pakistan if they really wanted to. But now they know that if that happens, the U.S. is going to come in and destroy it. So I think that is the issue with the military strike. On sanctions, this is a very good thing. Multilateral sanctions are what you need to put pressure on Tehran. We now have a president of the United States who is actually in favor of pressuring Tehran. Normally, the American president, no matter who it is, frankly, except for Trump, was interested in finding the moderates in Tehran and cutting a deal with the Iranian regime. Even Ronald Reagan tried to do that, if you go way back. And so now having a president that's more interested in pressure, I think, is a good thing. He's also, of course, said if Iran wants to come to the table and do a new deal with the United States and the rest of the world, he's open-minded on that. So I think the idea of putting more and more pressure on Tehran, economic, military, et cetera, that at the end of the day, it's all a very good thing.
So Morgan, we were talking about, sanctions are always like the go-to, right? And I think, we all here on the podcast know that that is not always something people agree with across the board in terms of like effectiveness. So I'm just curious to get your take on whether you think these sanctions will be effective.
Yeah, so I largely agree with Les on this in terms of deterrence being the primary, the effective piece of the puzzle here. Sanctions are not a strategy. Sanctions are a tactic, and they are intended to be part of a broader strategy that gets us to our end goal, and that is eliminating Iran's nuclear program. Look, these sanctions and the Europeans' move to reinstate them didn't come as a surprise to Iran. These conversations started taking place in August, where European negotiators told the Security Council that Iran had violated all of their JCPOA commitments, and that they were preparing to trigger snapback. Negotiators gave a long lead time to Iran, and to let them know that this was going to happen. And yesterday, the UN Security Council sanctions were reimposed. And I think it is notable that the Europeans, UK, France, and Germany, also known as the E3, were the ones to trigger them. They did work with Iran, try to work with Iran on the sides, on the margins of UNGA, the UN General Assembly, last week, to produce a deal, and it just did not work. And so the Europeans, I think, did the right move, and they sanctioned Iran. As Les notes, multilateral sanctions are an isolating tactic, and I think great, we've now done that. But to what extent are they actually going to further prevent Iran or deter Iran from pursuing a nuclear program? I think it remains to be seen. As Les noted, we still don't know the extent to which the strikes in June actually damaged Iran's nuclear capabilities. Uranium is stored way, way, way underground, and I think it's going to take Iran some time to rebuild. But at the same time, Iran has always said that it's got lots of time, right? It's got friends in Russia and China, and so I think this is a positive development, but it remains to be seen as to just how effective it will be in the long term.
So Jess, what are your thoughts on, not only sanctions effectiveness, but also how is our deterrence looking these days? And I actually think, Morgan, I think I totally agree that you pointing out that, the E3 making a move like this is actually pretty notable. I think we have seen the Europeans almost doing 180 on their positions with regard to Russia and Iran in the past several years. I think the Ukraine war has certainly underscored the problems. I think the only wrinkle here, of course, is this major shift by many of our allies to push for a Palestinian state in the context of this, and just to add broader context to this. Jess, what are your thoughts? Like, is American deterrence working? How is deterrence, working in terms of us, coordinating with our allies when it comes to Iran in particular, but also kind of in this bigger picture that we're dealing with?
Well, I chuckle a little where the headlines that talk about snapbacks also start with 10-year anniversary of the JCPOA, right? It's 10 years later, and yet where are we? We're talking about
feels very old.
I know, it feels very old. Decade, we've got sanctions are back, diplomacy kind of dead, and Iran maybe on the verge of a nuclear program. Right, we're not sure. So the headlines could be ripped from 2015. So I find that interesting. And I think both, Les's and Morgan's point, I think we also see when we talk about sanctions, we need not look any further than the Russia-Ukraine conflict, right? We're also trying to isolate multilateral sanctions to cripple the Russian economy. And yet they're still chugging along. We're years into a conflict there. The difference between 2015 and 2025, one major change is the growing, ties between Russia, China, and Iran. China and Russia continue to be lifelines to the Iranian regime. China purchases almost all of Iranian oil. Most analysts don't think that these sanctions are going to have much an impact on that purchasing. And Russia's just agreed a couple weeks ago to a $25 billion deal to build 4 nuclear reactor sites in Iran. So it seems like the major change in the headline, 10-year anniversary, closing relationships between these three, I'll put in air quotes, friends. And so to Morgan's point, the effectiveness of these sanctions, is a major question when you see these relationships able to sustain each other, right? And so I think, things to watch, of course, whether Washington and Israel, whether there's going to be additional attacks in Israel, right? I mean, in Iran, whether Iran, will actually allow full cooperations and access to their to the IAEA, or they're going to continue to restrict access. What room they have for negotiation. I mean, it seems to Les's point, the Trump administration doesn't really want to be at the negotiating table. Like, they're taking a hard line. So what does Iran actually bring to the discussions? I'm not really sure.
And Martha, one other sort of related point today that's worth noting is that Netanyahu and President Trump are actually going to be meeting today. And Netanyahu over the past year, he addressed the UN General Assembly on Friday, and he was unapologetic, unashamed. If anything, he came across as very, very emboldened by the work that Israel has conducted this year against Iran's nuclear facility. Clearly, the Israelis have a lot to be proud of. At the same time, though, I suspect the discussion between President Trump and Netanyahu will focus around the Trump peace plan for Gaza. And so I'll be interested to see what comes out of that. At the same time, Netanyahu will actually have to answer for the recent strikes in Qatar, which target a number of Hamas officials. And this was largely considered an unsuccessful operation. Strikes actually missed a lot of the targets that Israel had been hoping to neutralize. And not only that, but, of course, a lot was made of Israel not fully notifying, or if at all, the White House of these strikes was considered a major faux pas by President Trump. So with that said, sanctions, all well and good, great. But in the larger context here, I think we've got a really big meeting here today, which is going to, I think, dictate a lot of the next steps moving forward.
Perfect. Well, on that note, I think that's a wrap. Thank you, as always, to Kelly Crowley, Taylor Lane, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for helping produce today's episode. Join us on Wednesday, October 1st, for another episode of Hotlines, the National Security Institute's podcast to get you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. We're on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video. And if you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.